everyone. Today is Thursday, March 30th, 2023. Where does the time go? And we've got a big crowd and there'll be plenty more coming from the signups. So we're so pleased today to welcome Tara West to Will Work for Food, the New Possibilities Hour. As you know, every week, this is a program that is presented out of the goodness of the hearts of the speakers, their kindness and donating their time, and then Jeff Kachavin, who co-moderates, and Natalie Armstrong-Moton, who founded Will Work for Food, and myself, and then Sare Aragami. And so anyway, we're so thrilled to be here again today, and we're especially thrilled to have Tara West back with us for an encore performance. She is a mediator and conflict coach, a lawyer, and a woman, an author, a woman of many talents. But before we get to Tara, let's get to what Jeff calls his favorite part of the program. And so Jeff, where are we this week in terms of donations, of which we know?
Jean, thank you. It is indeed one of the best parts of the program each week. Our generous audiences so far have contributed an absolutely beautiful number, $375,000, $375,675.86 is what our audiences have contributed in honor of our great speakers to fight food insecurity worldwide. I might add, Jean, before I give it back to you, that Tara is the author of this book, The Mediator's Approach, and it's widely available and highly recommended. And in addition to contributing to food banks, if members of the audience want to pick up a copy of Tara's book, they'll be well advised to do so. Back to you.
Thanks so much. That's just amazing. Those are millions of meals that have been served around the world, thanks to this community and the speakers and everybody who's ever been involved. So that said, yes, that book, Tara's book, is available on Amazon. I just looked it up. I've got it myself. It's amazing. So let's get to Tara, though. First of all, her food bank that she's suggesting is Manna Food Bank in Asheville, North Carolina. And she can tell you a little bit about that herself in a moment. But basically, her talk today will be the what, why, and how of transformative mediation. And well, actually, that is the only type of mediation that she says she practices anymore. And aside from being an author, she is, of course, highly talented. She's taught and developed undergraduate and graduate psychology courses. She is she has a PhD in social and health psychology from Stony Brook University, and her JD is from New York University School of Law. I would just say, without further ado, Tara, let's go to you. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean. Thank you, everyone, for having me. You have accomplished so much. It's so amazing. So I'm really happy to be part of this again for a second time. And I'm going to share my slides so you can see a little bit more about Manna Food Bank. Yeah, so as Jean mentioned, it's right here in Asheville, and it stands for Mountain Area Nutritional Needs Alliance. And even though it's here in Asheville, it serves 16 counties in Western North Carolina. And a lot of those counties include poor rural areas that have very little access to nutritional food. And what I especially love about it is it's part of a regenerative food cycle right here in the area. So I'm part of a local compost collecting program, and the unused compost that we have can be donated to a garden in the area who donates their food to Manna Food Bank, who then donates food to the community. So it's nice to be part of that cycle. So thank you all in advance for any contributions you want to make to Manna Food Bank. Right. So the what, why, and how of transformative mediation. So this is a topic I'm really passionate about. Transformative mediation is probably one of the most well-known approaches to mediation, but it's also probably the most misunderstood. So hopefully today I'll be able to help address some of those misunderstandings, make it a little clearer. But I'm going to try to leave about 15 minutes or so to questions at the end. So feel free to let me know if there's anything that's not clear. So I'd like to start with a thought exercise. I'd like you to think back to the worst conflict you've ever been directly involved in. So not where you were the mediator or advocate, but your own conflict. Just get that in your mind. And then once you've got it, I'd like you to think back to the worst moment of that conflict. And once you've got that, can you see this? Is anything being blocked by this box on the side?
No, we can see it just fine.
Okay, great. So what was so bad about this worst moment? And I'd like you to actually put that in the chat for me, just a word, a phrase, a sentence to explain what was so bad about it. What made that the worst moment? Stress, felt powerless. I'm reading what's coming in the chat, but take your time. Anxiety, feeling alone, impasse, cannot communicate, anger, highly emotional, anxious. He responded to me with anger, hurtful words. And I don't know if those were your own hurtful words or hurtful words from the other person. Could go both ways, right? Hurtful words. All right, I'm going to go ahead and show the next slide. So it turns out you're all in very good company when it comes to what makes the worst moment of the conflict the worst. When people are asked this question, this is what shows up as the most distressing aspects of conflict. So on the one hand, there's a feeling of feeling powerless, out of control. We feel stuck, hopeless about the future. Someone mentioned an impasse. It's, feel like you're not going to get a resolution, overwhelmed, confused, not yourself. So maybe you're behaving in ways you don't like. And then on the other hand, there are feelings about how the other person is behaving towards us and how we're seeing them. So we feel betrayed by them. We're shocked by how the other person is behaving. We might start forming judgments about them. That person's being stubborn. They're selfish. We feel disrespected by them. So they're not being kind to us. There's a lot of that, right? They're disrespecting us. They're disregarding us. We don't feel heard or understood or listened to. And according to the transformative theory of conflict, which was first articulated by Bork, Bush, and Joe Folger in The Promise of Mediation, these are really two separate categories that fall under the labels weakness. So we're feeling weak. We're not feeling strong. We feel like we don't know how to handle this situation. We don't feel good about how we're handling it. And then on the other hand, self-absorption, that label means essentially we're so absorbed in our own perspective that we cannot see the other person's perspective. We don't get them. They are not making sense. And this is particularly frustrating or upsetting when we feel like we had a relationship with them. There's someone we cared about, and now they're treating us this way. But even when we don't know them, it's like, I thought I understood human beings. How could a human being be behaving in such a crazy, bad, terrible way? And if that weren't bad enough, these two states of weakness and self-absorption are not independent. They reinforce each other. So just within our own emotional experience, we're having a vicious circle of the more confused and overwhelmed and hopeless I feel, the less room I have for you and your perspective, right? I need to conserve my resources and protect myself, right? There's something scary going on. I don't have room to take you in and understand you. And then the more I'm feeling hateful, essentially, towards you, and like you're just a terrible person, I don't like feeling that way, right? That doesn't, I like normally feeling good about my interactions with people. So the more hateful and angry and upset I'm feeling with you and treating you that way sometimes, then that just makes me feel more confused and upset and scared. So that's a vicious circle that is very often going on within each person in the conflict. And then to make it even worse, when we're both having that experience, now we start interacting in a way where we're creating more of a vicious circle between us. So the more upset and frustrated and hopeless I'm feeling, the more I start treating you like an enemy and not like a fellow human being, right? And then as you're getting treated like an enemy, you start feeling more upset and scared and start treating me like an enemy. So this is the big sort of meta vicious circle that we in the transformative theory assume people are desperate to escape. This is what we hate about being in conflict. This is what we want help getting out of. So that's the bad news. The good news is most people are not stuck there forever. That vicious circle can actually unwind and become a virtuous circle. So if you think back to that conflict that you were thinking about a minute ago, you hopefully are not still stuck in that worst moment or that vicious circle with the other person, right? Somehow you found your way out of it. And that can happen a lot of different ways, but it usually doesn't happen all at once. It usually happens in shifts where we gradually start, going from feeling really unsettled to a bit calmer, from feeling really confused to a bit clearer, from feeling overwhelmed to a little more confident, like we can handle the situation. And in the transformative theory, we call those empowerment shifts. We're becoming empowered as we move from weakness to strength. And as that's happening, as we are becoming more empowered, we now have a little more room to let the other person in. So instead of feeling just completely defensive, like we have to protect ourselves, we now can be a little more open, a little bit more able to take them in. Instead of being suspicious that they are just everything, out to get us, we're now accepting that maybe they are acting in good faith, maybe. And instead of being completely locked in our own way of seeing things, we're now able to be a little bit more open to their perspective. How are they seeing things? We might not agree with them, but it's more like, okay, I can get how, if you see it that way, that makes sense that you would have said this thing and that maybe it was a misunderstanding. So in transformative lingo, we call these recognition shifts. You are beginning to recognize the other person as a person, a fellow human being, and not just an enemy or an obstacle. And like the vicious circle, strength and responsiveness also reinforce each other within each person in the conflict. So the stronger and clearer I'm feeling, the more I can view you and treat you like a fellow human being. I feel better about that. I feel stronger and clearer, better able to view you and treat you like a human being. And then between people, of course, the more I'm treating you like a fellow human with a little bit of openness, not so much defensiveness, you start to feel better, clearer, calmer, more able to see me and treat me like a fellow human, and on and on. And this is the place we are all thriving as human beings. Like this is our natural state where we feel good. We feel like I'm taking care of myself without harming anyone else. That is where we are at our best. And often people get there, they get through their conflict, they get there without the help of a mediator. But sometimes, as I'm sure you've seen before, people can get stuck in that vicious circle because it's not just a circle, right? It can actually be more like a spiral that is getting more and more out of control. Conflict escalation, another term for it. And so when people get to a place where they are so far down in that spiral, they don't feel like they can get out, and they might not be able to get out with help. In other cases, maybe they're just heading there. They're starting to see that movement and don't like where it's going, and they want help with it before it gets to that place where it's out of control. So as we see it, that's how we can help, is help them with getting from the vicious circle to the virtuous circle. So given that we believe that people want to be in that virtuous circle, that's the place we go often, naturally, we're aiming to do what we can to put them in the best position to naturally go from that vicious circle where they're hating life, hating being in that place, to the virtuous circle where they're feeling good. And generally, the general way of encapsulating what we do is we put choices in their hands and support those choices. And I'll say more about what that really means and exactly why we do that. So our three main practices, our three really only practices, are reflect, summarize, and check in. I'll take them one by one. So everyone reflects, or a lot of mediators reflect, but we don't all do it the same way. So the way we do it is we try to reflect what they said and how they said it. So as accurately as possible. If they say something like, my wife always puts me down in front of the kids. I hate it when she does that. We would say, you hate that. You hate it when your wife puts you down in front of the kids and she always does that. So you'll see I used a lot of the parties' words, the exact words they used, and tried to reflect the energy or emotion that the person conveyed. And I tried to be accurate. I just tried to capture the meaning, exact meaning, without trying to change or distort or reframe it in any way. And the reason is, as we see it, if the speaker can hear themselves think by hearing their words and their tone come back to them, then they start to feel more empowered. Like, okay, that's what I said. I get it. Now I can actually make choices about that. Maybe I want to keep going with it. Maybe I want to change it in some way, but I'm becoming more empowered because I have a chance to really hear it back. And then the listener also can now hear the speaker maybe a little bit better than they could before. So a lot of times in conflict, we block the other person's voice out, right? We just don't want to listen to them anymore. And so when the mediator is putting that person's words back in the room, the other person who wasn't speaking, and now from a safe distance, they're not under any pressure to respond at that moment. They can just hear it maybe a little bit better than before, allowing for a little bit of a recognition shift. And then they both can choose what to do from there. The speaker might decide that they want to say more. They might want to correct it if I didn't say it right. And the other person also can make a choice, right? So we leave it in their hands what they want to do next.
Excuse me, Tara, are you assuming this takes place in a joint session with everybody present?
Yes, this would largely be happening in a joint session. Sometimes we would do individual sessions as well.
And then is there a risk of being perceived as losing neutrality if you seem to be repeating what one side says with a lot of oomph and power?
There is definitely an art to it. So first of all, we would be doing that for both sides. So they'd hear it happen for them and they'd hear it happen for the other person. And we'd also tell them ahead of time, like what to expect, that this is what we're going to be doing, often reflecting back what we're hearing. But definitely, as I said, there's an art so that if you do it in a certain way, it could sound like you agree with the person, but we're trying to do it in a way which is like, I'm hearing you, I'm not judging you, I'm accepting that this is where you are, not trying to change where you are, but we're not trying to sound like, yes, you are correct, and that person's bad.
So how do you prepare people for that? You mentioned you prepare people for it.
Well, I do tell them, first of all, I have usually a consultation ahead of time and sometimes an individual session ahead of time. So I explain kind of the theory behind what I'm doing, why I'm doing it, and let them know that that's what's likely to happen. I haven't seen it myself where someone has, I think, interpreted it in the way you're suggesting, even though I understand how it could happen that way. A practice session I was doing one time, it did. I came on a little too strong, and the person in the role play, you could tell, was just like, didn't appreciate that. So it really does require some practice to get it to a point where, I'm just hearing you. Yeah. Does that?
Yes, thank you.
Answer? You're welcome. And also I would let them know ahead of time that if I'm doing anything that doesn't feel helpful, they should let me know. So I would try to read them, but also invite them to share with me if they are troubled by anything I'm saying or doing. Okay. All right. And then another thing we do is summarize the conversation. So we might summarize the whole conversation or summarize just part of conversation, like the last few minutes or something. And in that case, we identify the different themes that were covered, and we try to capture everything or everything that seemed important to them. So we don't try to be selective about only focusing on common ground or only focusing on problems that can be solved. We focus on whatever topics they covered, and we include where they agreed and we include where they disagreed. And we try to be as accurate as possible when we're doing that. I'm not trying to, again, reframe or sugarcoat or anything. It's you said this, you said that, and try to, again, use a lot of the same words. And we're doing this for a lot of the same reasons. But one thing, when we're summarizing, we're kind of shining a light on the conversation, it can feel more manageable, because sometimes the conversation, especially when you're covering a lot of different things and you seem to be jumping from one thing to another, it can just feel like overwhelming. So by saying, okay, you covered this, you said this topic, you said this, you said that, it just can feel more manageable. So that's it, gives them a feeling of empowerment, because instead of feeling so overwhelmed and confused, they now can feel a little bit more in control. Okay, I got this. Giving them the chance to hear again their own perspectives they shared, the other person's perspective. They now again have a little more of the empowerment of, oh yeah, I did say that. Oh yeah, now I'm hearing what you said a little bit more clearly this time. So allowing for some recognition shifts as well. And then again, at the end, we don't tell them what to do afterwards. So at the end of a summary, it might be tempting to be like, okay, so given that you covered all this, here's where you should go next, right? But we just leave it in their hands. Okay, here's what you covered. Sometimes right when we finish, one person will jump in with, oh yeah, that reminds me, I want to say more about that, or I want to bring up this other topic. But if they don't come up with something right away, if neither person says something, then we'll check in. So this is the other practice that we use, the third of the three. So in the case of the after summary, okay, what would you like to do next? Where would you like to go from here? That would be a check-in. So we're asking them what they want to do next and always reminding them these are their choices. So I'll give you a few examples. So at the very beginning of the mediation, before we even give any kind of a spiel, of here's our approach, would you like me to say a few words about the process? So 99 times out of 100, they're going to say yes, but this is just setting the stage that this is your approach, this is your conversation, right? So we're here to serve you. Would you like me to say a few words? Where would you like to go from here? You can do that in the summary, at the end of the summary, or maybe if there's seems like there's silence, nobody's saying anything. Okay, what would you like to do now? How would you like to spend the last 5 minutes? A few more examples. So this is a reflection plus a check-in. So sometimes when we reflect, we're not just reflecting words, we're reflecting what we're seeing in the room. So John, you've been pretty quiet lately. No pressure from me. I just want to make sure you had the opportunity to speak up if you wanted to. And then this next one is especially surprising, I think, to a lot of people. Again, a reflection plus check-in. I noticed you've been speaking over each other for a while. Not a problem for me. I just want to make sure you're okay with how the conversation's going, or see if you want to do anything else. So I really tried in a non-judgmental way just to say, here's what we're seeing. What would you like to do? And again, we're communicating that not only are these their choices, but that they're capable of making them. Because again, that lack of empowerment, that feeling of weakness, that feeling of I feel out of control. This whole situation is overwhelming. I don't know what to do. I don't know if I can make choices. By giving them all the choices from the beginning, including very small choices, they start to have the experience of, oh, I'm making these choices. They also end up working together a little bit sometimes at the beginning. Oh, why don't you go first? I'd like to hear what you have to say. Like that will happen. So they're making choices, they're working together a little bit. And this, we assume, is empowering. So in sum, we're supporting them through non-judgmental attention. So even when we're not saying anything, our body language, our facial expressions are all geared towards, I'm accepting what you're saying. I'm taking it in. I'm paying attention, right? And we help them hear themselves and each other more clearly when we reflect and summarize. And we're keeping all decisions in their hands by checking in, is directly telling them, these are your decisions. And also just by not making choices for them. So what we're doing is right here, we're focusing on supporting them. And while we assume that support will lead to the virtuous circle, we're not trying to push them or pull them into the virtuous circle. We're assuming that if we support them by putting choices in their hands and accepting their choices and supporting them, they will naturally move to the virtuous circle. And that once they're in that virtuous circle, once they're feeling calmer, clearer, more open to hearing the other person, that they will naturally have a lot of the constructive conversations that we've seen in mediation, and that we hope that people will do, and that we ourselves do a lot of the time when we're solving problems, negotiating, trying to work something out with someone. And that once they're having these constructive conversations, and they'll be able to reach their own goals in a way that feels good to them, and their goals are often going to be in agreement. So we assume way up here will lead them down to an agreement where a lot of mediators are trying to help them go. But we also are not attached to the idea that they'll reach an agreement. We think if we support them, they'll make the decisions that are best for them. So common misconceptions are that the mediator is prioritizing the relationship between the parties. Now, we have a relational view, meaning that we believe conflict is about how people are relating with each other in the moment, and that we're paying attention to that to see, okay, where are they right now? And if we can support them, we're assuming they start relating to each other and themselves better. But we are not focused on the relationship. We are not attached to the idea that their relationship continues. Whatever choice they make, they might want to decide they never want to see the other person again. It's not our concern. And related to that is that a lot of people think that this approach is only useful when parties have an ongoing relationship. But I want to speak for myself and invite you to think about your own experience. When I'm, say, interacting with a stranger, maybe I'm at a store, in a parking lot, some sort of situation where there's some sort of misunderstanding, and I feel like that person's mad at me, or maybe I did something that I feel bad about. I was a little snide, a little short with that person. Even if I'll never see them again, I feel bad about it. Like, I will sometimes think about it later. Oh, I wish I could have addressed that. Now I get what was going on. It was a misunderstanding. Now it bothers me. And I don't think I'm alone, right? Like, we care. We are social animals, we humans. And we are designed to interact with people in a way that, feels good. We're mainly cooperative. We have a competitive instinct, obviously. Competitive is part of it. But as we see it, we're happiest and feel our best when we're interacting in a harmonious way with other humans, regardless of whether or not we'll see them again or get anything from them that's tangible. And then a third misconception is that we're nudging them towards the virtuous circle. And it's very understandable if people believe that, because the first version of the promise of mediation did have an example of the mediator nudging the parties a bit to see each other's perspectives. And then after a while, Boric Bush and Joe Folger realized that that actually wasn't consistent with the transformative theory. First of all, we believe that empowerment comes first. We have to feel empowered before we can be open to the other person. But also, we believe that any kind of nudging is potentially disempowering. So the second version of the promise of mediation does not have any nudging, and they've gone out of their way to write and talk about the idea that, yeah, that was a mistake. Oops, our theory involves no nudging. So as Jeff and Jean both mentioned, I wrote the book, The Mediator's Approach, 5.5 Paths Through Conflict. So I recognize that, yay, I recognize that, oh, everybody watching this probably can't see Jeff. Jeff held out my book. Yeah. Anyway, I recognize that we can't put all of the other approaches into a bucket, but for purposes of trying to explain or demonstrate how transformative is unique, I'm just kind of throwing them in a bucket right now. So a lot of other mediators, not all, will use questions to gather information, whereas we use questions just to check in, not to gather information. A lot of other approaches will reframe parties' words and tone. Maybe they'll try to take out a little of the hostility or put things in a future focus, whereas we try to, as much as possible, accurately reflect their words and tone. Now, to some degree, Jeff was asking about this earlier, there's a limit, right, to how much we're going to reflect their tone. If someone is screaming at the top of their lungs, we're not going to scream. If someone is crying, we're not going to cry. But we're going to try to present our reflection in a way that demonstrates acknowledgement of where they are, acceptance of where they are. There's an analogy I came up with, actually, I think it was like right before I did this talk last time, of the motorcycle. I don't know if I told this last time, but if any of you have ever ridden a motorcycle or driven it yourself or ridden on the back, you know that if the driver starts leaning, like leaning into a turn, if you're in the back, you better lean with them. I learned the hard way one time. Fortunately, it was a moped and not a motorcycle. But if you don't lean with them, they will crash. But it's scary to lean with them. It's very scary to be leaning towards the ground and to feel like, if we're both leaning this way, we're more likely to crash. But reality is if we think of it as the driver is in the best position to know when and how to move back up, and try and apply that analogy here, that we're trying to lean with them. We're trying to offer support, assuming that they are in the best position to know when and how they can get back to a better place. Right. So if that's helpful, I like it. It's a good picture.
Tara, this is Jean. I just had a quick question about the word part. When they're screaming, I understand what you're saying. No, don't scream. What about when they're like swearing up a storm? How do you reflect that?
I have sworn myself. I don't know about up a storm, but there's a way of probably doing it in a way that's I'm accepting. This is perfect for the next part of going to the heat. We're assuming that if they use strong words, they use them for a reason, right? It's demonstrating that they are definitely in that vicious circle, and the other person heard them. Like, we can't pretend like they didn't get hurt. But when we use them, then that gives them a chance to really see where they are, for both of them to see really clearly where the person is who just said those words, and to give that person a chance to work through it in some fashion. So rather than just having it sitting out there, having this energy that's not being addressed, now they can address it. So maybe the person who said the word will, once they hear it back, go, oh, that was a little harsh. I'm sorry. Let me take that back. Or maybe they're like, yeah, I said that because I'm really upset and I have some more I want to say about that. And once they say more about it and they're heard, they'll work through it. So it's really about giving them the opportunity to work through what they need to work through. Also, maybe the other person is sitting there like seething about that word, but now they get a chance. Yeah, you said that word and that's not okay. So they both get to now address it in a way that however they need to address it is the idea behind it. But if they're saying like 5 swear words in a row, I'm not going to necessarily say all 5 swear words in a row. It'll have to feel it out in the moment, but just say it in a way to be like, I hear you. I'm not judging you. It's your conversation. So sometimes just repeating that word is a way of just showing like, yeah, you get to make these choices, not me. Does that answer your question?
Tara, there's another question here that fits now, if it's okay, and then we can move on into the rest of your presentation. But Paul asks, inside this transformative process, how do you deal with the party that is angry with you, or who is angry with you and doesn't want to participate this particular way?
That's funny because I have had parties angry at me, but I don't think not since I've been using this approach. Yeah, I think parties got more angry with me when I was trying to get them to do something as opposed to just supporting them. But to the extent a party is angry with me, I mean, I would reflect that back as well. So, and I see it all as their choices too. Like if a party doesn't like what's happening in the room because they don't like what I'm doing, then I would 100%. Well, first of all, if I could address their concerns and do something differently in a way that worked for everyone and still didn't contradict, my theory behind what I'm doing, I would try to accommodate as much as possible. But if they wanted me to practice in a way that didn't feel right for me, then I would say, I'd love to help you find another mediator, So does that answer the question?
Thanks so much.
You're welcome. Okay. And then just a few more ways that we're different. A lot of approaches will lead the parties. Maybe they'll lead them through different steps of the process or lead them to discuss one thing or another. Whereas we follow the parties. So the parties say something, we reflect, we summarize. And whereas a lot of mediators will emphasize common ground, we'll emphasize what the parties emphasize, which could include common ground. but we won't go out of our way to find a common ground or focus on the common ground any more than they were already discussing it. And where some mediators will, not all, I know, will suggest solutions or steer people away from other solutions, we will support whatever their decisions are. And of course, as human beings, we're probably going to have some opinions sometimes. Like we might think, that's not a bad idea. I mean, that is a bad idea. Or, we have this other idea in mind that we think would be better. But we aim to support their decisions with the idea for a couple of reasons. One, we believe they have more information than we do about their situation. So that they know more than we do about what's actually going to work for them. But if it is the case that wherever they're heading, the decision they're thinking about really isn't actually good for them, that supporting them will help them get to the best place where they'll be able to figure that out. And that to the extent we're trying to push or pull them somewhere, that could actually create some interference where they might now dig their heels in more, because that's kind of a natural response sometimes, right? When people try to get us to do something or think a different way, our natural response is, I want to defend where I am, right? Sometimes go the other direction of really, no, I know that my decision's right. So the next thing I'm going to talk about, we'll say a little bit more about that exactly, actually, why I practice it. My understanding is that the transformative theory is consistent with the research I'm familiar with on human nature, specifically basic psychological needs research. There's a theory called self-determination theory, which is a theory of motivation. Richard Ryan and Edward Deci, two psychologists, came up with it. And actually, there's another book I wrote, which I'm going to go ahead and plug right now, which I wrote with Dan Simon. Maybe it wasn't part of the previous intro about me, but now I have another book that's called Self-Determination and Mediation, the Art and Science of Mirrors and Lights. And so Dan Simon and I go into a lot of detail about self-determination theory, the three basic needs, and how that relates to transformative theory. So I'll just say briefly here, three of the basic needs are autonomy. So basically, we really want to feel like we're making our own choices. And when someone is nudging us, pushing us, pulling us, even trying to persuade us, it can just bring a natural response of, no, I want to make my own choices here. So by supporting people's choices, we see that as being more consistent with this theory. And then another basic need is relatedness or connection. We want to connect with our fellow humans in positive ways. So the way we see it, we don't need to push or pull people to connect. When people are feeling good and strong and in their best place, they will naturally connect. They'll naturally want to be nice to each other and get along well. And actually, one of the studies on relatedness shows that, or at least one study, that when you do push or pull or nudge people into cooperating, being nice, helping out, it can actually backfire. And even if they do it, they're not going to feel good about it, and the other person's not going to feel as good about it either. But when it comes autonomously, naturally, voluntarily, then everyone feels better about that good interaction they just had. And then the third basic need is competence. So we humans, and actually other animals, want to solve problems. We want to rise to challenges, expand our horizons, grow our skills. And so the way we see it is when we're giving people the room to come up with their own solutions, to figure out how they want to handle things, they're getting a basic need met of solving their problem, experiencing some competence, rising to that challenge. And it can be efficient. I don't want to hit this point too hard because it's not an intention of ours to be efficient. And it might be in some cases, it's not the most efficient, but generally speaking, the way I see it anyway, the parties have more information than we do. So when we stay out of the way and just support them in having their best conversation and getting where they need to go, that they'll naturally know which information they need to talk about, what's relevant, what's not relevant, and find a solution that works for them. Sometimes it might be that you ask a question or make a suggestion and it does actually really help. But a lot of the time, I think we can make suggestions and ask questions that just distract them and pull them away from where they would have gone if we had just given them more room, to have their own good conversation. And it feels good to me to do this, to do mediation this way. In the past, there were times that I felt almost like I was in conflict with the parties myself. Like I wanted them to do something and they didn't want to, and that felt frustrating. And I didn't feel like I was being as supportive as I could be. But now I feel like there's a weight lifted, like I have one job, support them. And so that's freeing, it takes, like I said, a weight off my shoulders, and it feels respectful. Most of the time, my experience is people really appreciate just being supported and being trusted, that they don't want to be hurtful to each other, that they want to be able to solve their problems, and that they have the capacity to do that. And I've seen some surprising results. Let's go ahead and share a couple of stories, my two favorite stories. One involves a divorcing couple who came to me with one problem that they were working out, which was how much was the wife going to pay the husband to buy him out of the marital home. And when they came in, they were about $20,000 apart. I think she was in the 30s, he was in the 50s. And through the kind of support that I've been talking about, they naturally had the kinds of conversations that we often hope people will have. They talked about why they thought their number was fair. They talked about what their needs were, why he needed a certain amount, why she could only afford a certain amount. And they did like good old fashioned kind of back and forth, moving a little bit closer to each other. But there was a point where there were still several $1,000s apart. And the wife said, "This is it. I cannot do any more. 43,000. Like that is all. That is just the best I can do." And the husband, you could tell, like, he knows his wife. He took it in, he heard her, and he said, "I'm going to go get a drink of water." And he did that, and he came back and he said, "I feel called to tell you that I will accept 41.5. And the wife and I are both like, "Wait, did we hear that right?" I think what I actually did is just reflect back what he said. "Okay, so you're saying 41.5 feels right for you." And he said, "Yeah." And she's like, "Are you sure?" He's asking for less than she was offering, right? And so that stumped me a little bit. But then I thought about the basic needs. And I was like, oh, his need for autonomy might have been partly what was going on there. Like he knew he wasn't going to get a number that was higher than 43. And something in him wanted maybe just to choose a number that he could somehow get behind. And maybe he did some calculations when he was gone and he figured out why he would say that was the right number. He didn't explain it. He just said 41.5. Also, our need for relatedness. He was making a generous gesture to his wife. This was a way of potentially ending things on a positive note, which might have felt better to him. So that was my explanation for that one. I have one more story. So this one involved two women who they started a nonprofit together and they were friends. They were like really close friends for a while, but they ended up having such a falling out, such a terrible friendship that they were ending the friendship. One of them was going to leave the nonprofit, and they actually had an appointment set up for after the appointment with me to have a lawyer write up a no contact agreement for them. So they were like as done as could possibly be, but they still had some things they needed to work out about how they were going to dissolve or how they were going to have the one person leave the nonprofit. And they had things they wanted to say to each other. So one of them had a whole letter that she had written, which she wanted to read through during the mediation. And so she did that. And harsh words were said, words that I would never use in polite company were said, and I repeated them. I reflected them back. Early on, partly to just say, it's okay, you can say what you want to say. And most of the time, they didn't seem to want much from me at all. And she had a lot to say, who was reading the letter. The other one wanted to respond to that letter. And at one point I just said, "Are you getting the support you need from me? Or is there anything else that would be helpful here?" And they're like, "Nope, just having you here is good. That's helpful." And so for the rest of the time, I pretty much just nonverbal body language, eye contact, demonstrated acceptance. And after about an hour and a half of what seemed like a pretty harsh conversation, the type that I would have been tempted to try to change, I would have thought, they're not getting anywhere. Why are they, doing all this? After about an hour and a half of that, they got through the letter and they were just like, boom, boom, boom with the, you take this file, I take that file, here's how we'll handle this video. And as far as I know, afterwards, everything was over, friendship was over, they did the no contact order. But the next day, one of them sent me an email saying that she had been worried about coming to mediation because she was afraid that they wouldn't be able to do what they needed to do. They wouldn't be able to say all the things they wanted to say, and that I would somehow interfere with that. And that she was appreciative that I didn't. And she said that she slept well that previous night for the first time in months. So of course that feels good. It always feels good when we hear that we helped someone, but it's also just inspiring. Like, yeah, they know more than I do about what they needed to do, So I'm going to stop now. Well, I'll show you actually some contact info and stuff. So transformativemediation.org is the Institute for the Study of Conflict Transformations website. So if you want to know more about transformative, they have workshops and lectures and trainings and all sorts of things like that. And then there's my website and my email address. I'm also on LinkedIn, so feel free to connect with me there. And I want to show you, but I'll leave this up for a second in case people want to write it down. I guess I could put it in the chat. I also want to show you this. So this is the second edition of the Promise of Mediation. So if you're going to get the Promise of Mediation, make sure you get one that looks like this, because the first one was the one where they were doing the nudging, and that is now defunct. Okay, I'm going to stop there, and I welcome all of your questions.
Thank you so much, Tara. I have put in the chat the Amazon link to both of your books.
Oh, thanks.
I didn't realize that one with Dan Simon is from 2022, and the other, the one, the green book is 2021. So you've been busy.
Yeah.
Great. Yes, we do have one question here in the chat, and then we can open it up. We have a few minutes here. Let's see. Someone asked if you could please, Gary asked if you would please elaborate on the meaning of virtuous circle, please.
Yeah, I didn't come up with that term. That's Borek Bush and Joe Folger used that term to describe basically the opposite of the vicious circle. So the vicious circle is when conflict is getting worse and worse and worse, and those two states of weakness and self-absorption are reinforcing each other. But the virtuous circle is when things are getting better and better and better. So I'm feeling calmer and clearer. I'm more open to hearing you. And those states reinforce each other because that's how we feel our best. So we start to feel better the way we're relating to the other person. And then between us, the virtuous circle reinforces itself because, of course, if I'm treating you in a positive, connecting way, you feel much better yourself and better about me, and you treat me better. And so that we assume it's not just a circle, it's also a spiral where it can actually get really beautiful. I've seen people like in a really bad state coming in, walking out like laughing, joking. Dan has stories of people who didn't even want to be in the same room with each other, or walking out like hugging. Doesn't always happen, but it can happen, and it's lovely to see when it does.
Tara, I have a question. I remember in past decades, maybe 20 or 25 years ago, watching some videos of the transformative approach in action. And when you say virtuous circle, it really did appear to be a circle where they were just going around and around and around saying the same thing. It was like watching an Andy Warhol movie. And in the world of commercial mediations, lawyers hire us to get deals done if there's any reasonably possible way to get a deal done. And the lawyers who hire us, I suspect, might get impatient if it just seems to be going nowhere and it's a circular conversation. You've probably seen some of those 25-year-old videos as well. So one of the things that you mentioned in the description of your program for us is that there have been significant changes in the transformative approach, progress or evolution of the transformative approach. How has the transformative approach evolved to take account of the fact that if we actually want people to hire us and pay us money to do mediations, there has to be some idea that we would like to make a deal if it's possible, And if people seem to be going around and around in a circle, lawyers are going to give us the old raised eyebrow and want us to do something to get the show on the road. That's kind of a long and convoluted question, but please comment on any part of it you'd like.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I saw the same videos. So I've seen Purple House mediation
Yes, I think
videos.
Purple House, was one of them.
Okay, and I don't know when that came out, but 25 years ago would have been before the newer version. So I'm pretty sure Purple House was actually from the newer version. And it's interesting that from your perspective watching that, it just felt like they were going around in circles. And maybe I do remember some of that, but they did seem to get to a better place in the end. However, yeah, in that case, there were no lawyers there. So it was just the parties kind of saying what they needed to say and doing it how they needed to do it. I'm imagining that, well, first I want to say that the evolution was just the lack of nudging. So the main change, and it's kind of it feels significant on our part, is that we are not trying to get them into the virtuous circle by telling them, why don't you look at it from this perspective? Or can you see what the other person was trying to say? Because we see that as potentially obstructing the empowerment. So that's the main evolution. But in terms of lawyers, I don't think that was covered in Promise of Mediation, but Dan and I did cover lawyers. We have a whole chapter on lawyers in our book because Dan has worked a lot with lawyers. I haven't, but we treat them, Dan treats them. And when I say also, I would, if I were in that situation, treat them like another party in the room. So we assume that lawyers are also human beings who can get in the vicious circle themselves, and that by reflecting, summarizing, accepting their choices, that they will get to a better place. And we would assume that if the lawyers are not happy with how things are going, that they could absolutely say it, and that they have more power to actually change things than we do, potentially. Like they can say, we're not getting anywhere, we're walking out, or these are my demands and I need you to address them right now. So we try to put everything in everybody else's hands but ours, but that could include the lawyer's hands. So I think there are some mediators actually that try to actually push the lawyers back and just have everything be about the parties. And I don't know if that's kind of what you're referring to, where the lawyers might be frustrated if we're just like, lawyers, we don't want to hear what you have to say. We want to just let the parties talk about their thing. We would 100% support a lawyer coming in and saying, let's get to business now, bottom line.
So in many cases, the lawyers come in with an expectation. It's not always a good idea, in my view, but many times lawyers come in with an expectation that the mediation will be principally, if not entirely, conducted in caucuses, where the mediator talks to one side, gets a offer, demand, shuttles down the hall. It's oftentimes, in my view, not the best way to conduct a mediation, but yet it's an expectation of many in the marketplace. How do you recommend dealing with people who come in from that culture, lawyers who perhaps have advised their client, we're going to a mediation, this is how it goes, and the transformative mediator may have a different system entirely in mind?
Well, we would tell them as much as possible about how we do things, but if they wanted to be in separate rooms, that would be okay. Some mediators, some transformative mediators might actually pass messages back and forth. I don't want to speak for all of them. I know that Dan doesn't, and except maybe, there's an exception to every rule. But what Dan does is he'll say, if you want to be in separate rooms, that's okay. I can't pass messages because I'm afraid I won't be able to do it in the way that really captures what you were trying to say. But you get to decide how you want to get messages back and forth. Whether maybe you want to just let the lawyers go back and forth and talk to the other side, or the lawyers want to get together, or they want to have a phone call or email. Like, you get to make whatever choices you want to make if you don't want to be in the same room, but I'm not going to pass messages. And in his experience, people might start out that way, but then eventually they realize it's just more efficient to come together. And so they do, and they have a great conversation. So I don't know there's a foolproof way to do it. Some lawyers might say, I don't want to do what you're doing. I mean, I want to choose a mediator that does it the way that I'm used to. And we just have to kind of accept that. But I do think that, Dan has had experiences where lawyers have been really surprised by how well things went, how efficient things seem to go when they could just have a good conversation with each other and not have the mediator passing back and forth. But everybody, you know, every mediator has to do, obviously people are trying to make a living. And if you feel the need to comply to some degree with the lawyer's expectations, I'm not going to say that you shouldn't do that.
And I suppose part of it too is the transparency in advance on the part of the mediator and the mediators holding themselves out as providing services of a certain type. And people can decide whether they want that or not.
Exactly. Yeah. And some lawyers have taken Dan's training and then so they get it. And a lot of times it's just word of mouth, like they had a good experience, so they'll spread the word. But for lawyers that don't know about it ahead of time or understand ahead of time, it could be a little bit of a learning curve or obstacle. Anything else?
We have a few minutes left. If anybody would like to ask a question, Jean or anybody else, please speak up.
Yes. Good morning, everybody, and thanks very much, Tara, for the very informative seminar. The question which I'm asking is, Jeff, is when you mentioned about commercial arbitration and involvement of the lawyers, basically in organizations, when there is a problem between two organizations, only the lawyers will be present. The parties are not involved normally. And that's why you have a problem with the lawyers who have entrenched in their location, in their position. And therefore, to transformative, that is not possible. Probably is the most viable one is a facilitative approach than transformative with lawyers, because lawyers, as you said, they don't have the option, or they don't have the stamina to sit a long time ago and discussing things like that. They just want to have a resolution of their problem and to help them to come to a resolution. Is that right or not?
So I'm not sure if you're asking me or Jeff.
No, I'm putting the question to you, Tara, and Jeff together, because we mentioned the things about commercial arbitration, where the parties merely, if it's a big organization, the owner doesn't come to these meetings. They send their lawyers to this meeting. Yeah.
Well, I would say that we would do our approach, however, the same way, regardless if it was there. So even if it was just lawyers, we would support them in having their best conversation. So we wouldn't be encouraging them to talk about anything they didn't want to talk about. If they wanted to come in and just talk about the bottom line, hammer out a deal, but they needed some help with that, our help would be the same type of help we provide whether the parties were there or not. Is that, I don't know, maybe Jeff, you have more to add?
Sounds right to me.
Thank you so much. Well, we're just about at the top of the hour here, so I'd like to say thank you so much to Tara for coming back and giving us an encore presentation. This has been fantastic. And for all of you attending, this is great. And all of you who will be listening or watching later on the video, Jeff's holding up the book. There are two books, a 2021 and a 2022 book available on LinkedIn. You can just search for Tara West. And so as always, same time next week. Next week's presentation will be Jennifer Keller, and she's going to be talking about mediators and the unreasonable client. So be here. We'll look forward to seeing you then. And thanks for any donation you can make, whether it's to the Manna Food Bank or to any other. And please let Natalie, Jeff, or me know the amount if you would. We'll be thrilled to add it to our running total. 400,000, here we come. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.